bringing on the mainstay of the 4 o'clock hour on this show, and that's John McMullen, who I know has been listening to this show since we came on at 2 o'clock.
Wow, you're putting pressure on him.
I am. All right, and he better rise to the occasion here. This is what people do in the business, right? We scratch each other's backs. I know he's been listening, and he's going to give this show at least an A+ if he were doing a report card. Is that right, John McMullen?
At least.
Yeah, at very least, an A+.
Yeah, with bated breath, 5 stars. And that's only because it's a 5-star scale.
That's right.
You can't go any higher.
I was going to say, you're forcing John McMullen to lie.
Wait, we couldn't even get a bonus star? Like, you know how you were able to get the A+ with a little extra credit in high school?
A++. Come on. 5 stars, you're complaining? Come on.
Right? That's what I've been dealing with, John.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, John, as always, we love having you on as we do our football at 4 o'clock segment, and I will try I guess Ryan and I will try to fill in for Mike as best as possible. Listen, I listen to the segment every day. Mike just throws you a softball question, and you hit it out of the park. So I got no issues here that I can just ask you anything. But the first thing that comes to my mind is I see today a tweet from, I think, Saturday Night Football's Twitter account, SNF, on NBC, that Darren Sproles is working out with Chase Daniel and Drew Brees out in San Diego. I think Donnell Pumphrey is also in that mix. In that mix of all-stars there, which is something that happens every summer, right? But this one's a little bit more catchy because a lot of people think Darren Sproles ain't coming back. What do you think?
No, I don't think he's coming back unless injuries start to pile up. If it's up to Doug Peterson, he would love to have him back. And Doug, I talk about it all the time, trusts Darren Sproles. And when he has been healthy during the Peterson era, which hasn't been often, but you see he kind of defaults to him in key situations. He just trusts him more than any other back that he's had. But I do think from Howie Roseman's perspective, and I think Howie's right, I think at some point you got to make difficult decisions. At Darren's age, which is with his injury history, I think you got to turn the page, and they brought in 2 backs that they want to count on, and Jordan Howard and Miles Sanders. But if something happens, somebody gets injured, that's the first call if nobody else signs them. I will say that.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've kind of written it as I haven't written it as I think it's going to happen, but I've always put it out there as a chance, right? And my thought process is this, that even Miles Sanders has a way to go, and he missed all the camps, so we have to see what he has to do. But even as a rookie, he ain't going to compare from a skill set what he can do catching the ball. He didn't do that a lot at Penn State to what Darren Sproles has done. So even if you're keeping Corey Clement, Jordan Howard, Miles Sanders as your top 3 backs, and you're going to keep 4, right? And they may keep 5, but let's say you're only keeping 4. Isn't it possible that by the end of the camp you realize that your Wendell Smallwoods, Josh Adams, and Donnell Pumphreys of the world aren't worth holding on to if you can just bring back Darren Sproles at that point?
Well, and I will say the argument for that is this team is obviously believes, and I believe they're correct as well, that the window is open to win a Super Bowl. So there's some merit to that. I think you're right. I mean, Darren Sproles at this stage is certainly going to probably perform more than Miles Sanders as a rookie. He understands how to play just from a pass protection standpoint as far as running routes out of the backfield. And these are these difficult decisions you have to weigh as a personnel guy and building rosters in the NFL. Everybody goes through it, and they're difficult decisions every year. And you're trying to serve 2 masters. You're trying to go as far as you can go, win a Super Bowl, but you also not only have the eye on September, but also the year after that and the year after that. So I do think the Eagles have weighed that, and I think they have their plan in place, but it's always in pencil or in sand, as Chip Kelly would say.
Yes.
And if something happens, I could see them visiting it. I think the plan, though, is to go in a different direction. Otherwise, they would already re-signed him. Remember, last year it was after the draft. Once they couldn't get what they want accomplished, Howie had his post-draft press conference, they announced the signing. So, as long as he's on the street, there's a potential, and he clearly is thinking about playing, probably even wants to play. I just think the Eagles want to go in a different direction.
John, Pro Football Focus came out with a ranking. Now, it wasn't team ranking. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's just ranking the strongest rosters in the NFL. Clearly,
I saw that.
Yeah, it's summertime. There's a little bit of free time here, so let's do it. They have.
Done. They had the Patriots at number one.
I know. I mean, they really went out on a limb.
I totally thought it would be the Bucs.
Detroit Lions.
The Bucs might be more talented than the Patriots. That's how much credit I give Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. I just do not see that at all as the number one roster in the NFL. I'm exaggerating, of course. There's still a lot of really good players, but just think about Rob Gronkowski's no longer there. Maybe you can get them in the top 10, but I don't think they're even in the conversation for top 5. I think they have the Eagles at 4. I think they're a top 5 roster. I think that's legitimate.
So just for the listeners, they have the Patriots at 1. Excuse me. They have the Los Angeles Rams at 2. They have the Saints at 3. Getting all choked up because the Patriots are number 1. The Eagles at 4, Bears at 5, Chargers 6. Then
Boy, they
Chiefs,
really went out on a limb.
Chiefs, Steelers, Vikings, Colts to round out the top 10.
Yeah, and it's you're right. Going out on a limb, it's obviously all playoff teams from last year and all highly successful teams, and it's understandable because that's what they are. They're an analytic company, and they're basically going on last season. So the best teams played the best, and in theory have the best rosters. It never works out that way in the NFL. We all know there's worst to first every single year in this league for a reason. It's a lot more difficult. You think about the Eagles winning the Super Bowl versus the season before, worst to first. You think about the Chicago Bears who are on that list. Well, they were worst to first in the NFC North. That's what happens when you have a last place schedule. It makes things a little bit easier. And then conversely, when you have a first place schedule, things get a little more difficult. So I can guarantee that list is going to be different if we're talking about it this time next year.
That's the beauty of the NFL. Now, John, if you have to take one of these playoff teams and say they're not going to come back this year and be a playoff team, they're going to struggle, they're going to have a down year, whatever it may be, who do you predict?
The Bears, because of the quarterback and what I just said about the schedule.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be much more difficult for them. Not to say it's obviously a tremendous defense, but also realize they lost Vic Fangio, who's now the head coach in Denver as well. So they're changing defensive coordinators. They don't have that great defensive mind leading it. They're certainly tremendously talented, but even if you go back to last season, so many turnovers. And we all know, look, as good as you are, as talented as you are, turnovers a lot of times, I don't want to use the term luck because good teams create turnovers, but there are situations it's unlikely you're going to have that wave of turnovers year after year after year. It just doesn't happen like that.
This is why I love talking football with John, by the way, because when I was on with Mike either last week, we were going through, teams that will make the playoffs and won't, and I said I think the Chicago Bears are more likely to miss the playoffs than they are to repeat as division champs. Now, again, that's not going out on a limb knowing A, the division, B, the quarterback play, and C, just the history and precedent that X number of teams who win it one year don't make it the next year. But I would say, John, I feel like you and I are almost on an island on this. A lot of people think the Bears are going to be really good, and I look and I say, new coaching staff with Green Bay, Aaron Rodgers still there, fresh scenery, fresh change. They're still going to be really good. And I still think the Vikings will be a decent enough team to give the other two teams a little bit of a headache. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Lions weren't a total dumpster fire and won a few games.
No, I agree. The division, I probably should have brought that up as the third part of it because you do have 3 at least somewhat competent teams that if things go in a positive direction, they could make a run towards the playoff. You can make an argument even for Detroit because of Matthew Stafford, some of the talent they had at second year of Matt Patricia finally putting his plan into place. Aaron Rodgers, we talk about all the time. I mean, anytime you roll him out there, you got a chance to win. And the Vikings, their Achilles heel was their offensive line. They've done a lot on the offensive line. They've addressed it. I do my safest picks every year, first round pick. It's Garrett Bradbury this year. He's going to be a Pro Bowl center. I don't know as a rookie, but really, really quickly he's going to ramp up. They brought Josh Klein, who's at least a competent offensive lineman. So if they go from bottom 5 offensive line to middle of the road, that's a playoff team. So you have difficult division, first place schedule, and worst quarterback in the division. That's tough for the Bears.
John, switching gears a little bit for the Eagles, we haven't talked, you and I at least, together about some of the moves that were made in the recent weeks through the front office. And one of the things that I said was I thought it was really important that Howie Roseman promoted Andy Weidel because it kind of keeps the scouting philosophy that they've had that's worked well here in place. And then obviously with Ian Cunningham and other guys that Joe Douglas brought in, they get promoted, less incentive to leave, and they get extensions. So you kind of keep that philosophy that Joe Douglas brought in place. I saw you tweeted today. I laughed. I guess somebody is upset that you dared to insinuate that Andrew Berry is also like a very important part of the front office.
Yeah, I don't know. People get upset. He's the number 2 guy on the football operations side,
right?
Which encompasses more than scouting, which I think people don't realize. So, and he's in charge of the scouting department, as Joe Douglas is. But there has been a little bit of shift, and this is what happened in February when the Eagles brought in Andrew Berry. It wasn't as clearly defined. And that was the start of the succession plan because the Eagles didn't realize they were going to lose Joe Douglas that quickly. But they had a pretty good indication this was it. This was going to be the last year for Joe Douglas in Philadelphia. So that was the start of the succession plan. And I do think, and I don't know what you've heard, Geoff, but this is what I've heard, they are shifting a little bit, and they are putting more of an emphasis on the analytics side of the equation. But they're trying to marry analytics with scouting, and Andrew's done both. So to me, and how it was explained to me, it's sort of like 2 branches, scouting, which is Andy Weidel, analytics, which is Alec Halaby, and then they go to Andrew Berry, and then Howie Roseman sits atop.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and the way I would put it is in talking, I don't think anybody really exactly knew other than Howie, what Howie was going to do when Joe left. And I think people who I spoke to around the league, some who have ties to the organization, some who just know it well, said to me, we wonder what's going on here because if they don't promote Andy Weidel and they move Andrew Berry more, expand his role and make him the most powerful person underneath Howie Roseman, that would herald or signal a total shift into analytics mode. But you used a great word. Since promotion of Andy, people have said it sure seems like they're trying to marry the idea of traditional field scouting with new wave analytics. And that's a good idea. It can be an uneasy marriage because a lot of times those two groups don't respect each other. You're kind of pitting football people versus numbers people, even if the numbers people have played a little bit of football. And there's a lot of yeah, but on each side. But it's worked so far. It doesn't mean it's going to continue to be a harmonious marriage. I think that's the big thing we have to look at going into the future is how well this continues to work.
Yeah, and look, the Eagles have been kind of at the forefront of the analytics movement in the NFL, and one of their guys, Taylor Rajak, just got hired in Carolina to be their first director of football analytics. And the Eagles have been doing this for about a decade. They've been heavily invested. So they've been ahead of the curve. And I think one of the reasons Joe Douglas, I'm not going to say wanted to leave the organization, but wasn't looking to be Eric DeCosta or George Patton or somebody like that, a long-term number 2, is because he does know that this organization puts a little bit more emphasis on analytics than most organizations. And some will say that's good. Some will say it's bad. I think it's good. I think they've done a tremendous job with it. I think you can see evidence by the way the rest of the NFL regards this organization They have been ahead of the curve. So I don't mind the setup. Other people seem to be upset by it. I don't understand. The football, as you know, Geoff, football operations, and Andrew's vice president of football operations, that includes scouting, that includes analytics, that includes football administration, which is salary cap and contracts and things like that. So he's got a big role in this organization, and it doesn't mean Andy Weidel doesn't have a big role. He's
right.
the head of the scouting department, which is tremendously important.
Yeah, I think the dilemma is that people don't know. They hear analytics, they know it's being used, but they don't per se know how the team is using it.
I was literally going to ask that.
I guess the best example I could come up with is a player like Anquan Bolden, who's going to probably be in the Hall of Fame, who probably would not check off a single box on what a scout would look for in a football player. I mean, no speed, very little explosion, no separation quickness, but that guy was so productive because his was stronger than any corner or linebacker or safety that was going to try to defend him. He had excellent short area twitch, and he was able to make catches in traffic. Jason Avant kind of the same way. And if analytics people would have looked at him and said, no, thank you, but a football scout would have said, nah, you got to look deeper and see this guy knows how to play the game. That's where we don't know. We don't know what mindset wins out in the Eagles front office in that regard.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't think you ever know, really. And that's, I think it struggles, and that's why people say, before Joe Douglas left, there was always the question, well, does Howie Roseman deserve credit? Does Joe Douglas deserve credit for a Super Bowl roster, for a top 5 roster that we're just talking about? Well, they both deserve credit, but it's Howie's department. Howie's in charge. Howie gets the blame when things go bad. Howie's the GM that's rated number 1 by Sporting News or whoever when things go right. That's his department. That's his job. And it's his job to hire the people. And he's gone in a slightly different direction because he's had to, because Joe left to take a GM job of his own. That happens all the time with successful organizations. He took Chris Nolan with him. As I just mentioned, Taylor Rajak left for Carolina. These are names that maybe the casual fan doesn't know, but it tells you what the rest of the league thinks of the Eagles front office.
So, John, just to dive a little bit deeper into the analytics and kind of what Geoff was getting into is like
it's Dr. John, by the way.
Dr. John, sure, of course. Dr. John, I need a couch because we can talk all day. But like when you look at baseball, you can see the impact of analytics and how they're shifting the game. Whereas in football, to the average fan, the casual fan, you're saying, well, what's changed here? Like, I feel like I'm still watching football. I don't know it's a little bit faster, but when you talk about analytics, like just to give the listener and the casual fan, how is it impacting the product? What decisions are being made analytics-wise that's really impacting the on-field game of the NFL?
Well, from the Eagles' standpoint, the most obvious part in game is their aggression on 4th down, and that's pretty analytics-driven, and they've studied those situations. And there's times you say, why the heck are the Eagles going for 2 here? And that's because the numbers and they crunch them, and that gives you a better percentage to win the game. And you see the rest of the league is kind of following suit, and they were ahead of the curve again. From a scouting standpoint, you sort of crunch the numbers. And Geoff just mentioned the outlier of Anquan Bolden. But what you do is, the scouting combine, and you look at particular positions. You take into account what your coaching staff wants, what type of player, and you look in the past, and you look at all those measurables, and you try to match up with who's been the most successful. What do you need to be a good running back in this league? What do you need to be a 3-down linebacker? What physical traits? And that's sort of how you marry it to scouting. But Geoff is right that you need that old school mentality, or you're gonna pass over a player like an Anquan Bolden. So there's value to both parts of it, and this is where Jeffrey Lurie comes in. And when he made the change from Chip Kelly back to Howie Roseman, he preached communication, collaboration, And he told Howie, look, if you're the same way you were in the past, this isn't going to work. You're going to have to listen to other people. You're going to have to listen to other ideas. To this point, he seems to have done it. So I think you have to give him the benefit of the doubt in trying to go another step and trying to get these two departments to work toward one goal.
All right, John, before I let you get out of here, you tweeted earlier this week, quote tweeted, I should say, Sean McVay obviously got married to his lovely Ukrainian model wife, or fiance, and you retweeted it and wrote with your own commentary, I hope she likes 11 personnel. And I want to know, I read deeper into that comment, I think, and I don't know if it was intended or not. Were you just making kind of that's his choice of offensive format, or was there something deeper to it?
No, just his. Well, she is very fetching woman, by the way. So Sean McVay is a very lucky man.
Yes. But, well, I'll tell you what I read into it, and this tells you how sick I am and football obsessed. 11 personnel is clearly 3 wide receivers and 1 tight end, right? So I thought you were insinuating that she better like just one tight end in her life and be a faithful woman. Not 12 personnel, John. That's 2 tight ends.
It did have a double entendre.
Yes! I sniffed it out.
However, it didn't go that far. It was Sean McVay plays 90% 11 personnel, and she has a nice back end. So that's
we were there synonymous. Okay.
That's a better one.
Well, I see. In that regard, you could have said, "Well, he likes 11 personnel," but you tweeted, "I hope she likes 11 personnel."
Well,
so that's why I thought maybe you were.
It was very quick, just a quip, and it landed to at least one person. So
Mike Gill will never let me do this segment with you again. I guarantee you that. Thanks, bud. We appreciate it, man. Great stuff as always. You can read John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com and hear him every day from Monday through Friday at 4 o'clock. Here on 97.3. See you, John.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.
Take care.